So, in a nutshell, what happened in 2008 and that financial crisis that basically affected the world and caused a global recession, that was in very, very simplistic terms, a lack of fiscal restraint and regulation on the financial markets. Based in America, which had a contagion effect in most circumstances, but it affects us here in the UK as well, right? So what was going on in America was pretty much you had subprime properties, which are low price properties with 100% mortgages available to people that couldn't afford it, that were then letting out their properties and so on and so forth, and it created a storm of where you had people not being able to afford a mortgage, having 100% a mortgage on a property that's not necessarily worth a lot of money. So there was no equity in there for the person that was actually the owner of the property. What happened? There was a massive contagion whereby, and I can go into the details of aggregation and banking practice, where they aggregated all of they pulled together all the mortgages held by all these people and then sold them on and sold them on and sold them on. Okay, but you can get lost in that. But the premise is a simple one. People couldn't afford their mortgages, and they were on. There was an affordability thing that basically caused a massive problem. Here in the UK, we've got a unique system that comes from effectively the planning constraints and the fact that we live on an island and we haven't got much land, right? So effectively housing in the UK, London specifically, has got an inflated version of this, but effectively where there is no land to build houses, you've got supply and demand issues. You add that to the mix in, and you consider that, and it tells a different story in the UK. For a start, we didn't have the same subprime issues. You could argue we did to a certain degree, and it's good banking practice that's been employed now. But having 95% mortgages in the UK, generally we didn't have a situation where house prices were likely to drop off because of the supply and demand issues, right? So they were going up. So we had a very, very quick bounce back in the period here in the UK, where it did decline because naturally there was a global recession. But what happened quite quickly in fiscal terms is it equalised and it came back up. We had another dynamic that was affecting the UK housing market here, which is we have what is called a buy-to-let property situation, where people were buying second properties, renting them out themselves from the equity that they had from their existing homes and savings and so on and so forth, and they were using it as a kind of a pension fund. That's being curtailed in July 2022 by policy to enable those people that are struggling to get on the housing ladder at the moment to buy their homes. But then that's a government-led aspect. Tying that back to 2008, 2009, that contributed to the recovery quite well. And so, because obviously what happens when house prices go down? People who have got money dive in. So there's all sorts of different things that are different from the UK housing market to the global housing market, and why the UK housing market recovered quite quickly from what was a global crisis financially, and even though the economy didn't bounce back as well as you would normally see, it still did quite well in that environment on this island of Great Britain. But the housing market recovered quite quickly.